I think, an interesting symmetry that this happens at the beginning of Jesus' life, and it also happens at the end, or actually sort of somehow after the end, although actually at the new beginning, right? At the,
like his new birth in a way. Yeah.
It's important that the Church Fathers didn't pick one of those and say, well, this is really the correct story, and try to remove the diversity among the gospel stories by trying to harmonise them.
So why are they not all on the same page?
Well, that's what I'm going to
Because it's true. And many others, Gnostics, all the Gnostics would say, no, get rid of the Old Testament, this is a violent God, he's just deterring people
it's
from...
It's too complicated, I don't understand how this works, so I'm going to get rid of it.
Let's get rid of it and bury it,
Why are they talking about the burial plots? I mean, just what's that about? I mean, does anyone care whether there were bits of cloth in the... surely that's not the point. Surely the point is the body's not there anymore.
We ourselves enter into life only through tomb. We need to enter into death.
Of death, of Hades, as a prison that has been broken out of. And Christ is leading a prison revolt.
Dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. Who's dressed in a white robe on Great and Holy Saturday? The Church baptizes all those on Great and Holy Saturday, on Resurrection Day.
Oh, wow.
So this walking stick, right, kind of that Aaron has, actually comes back to life.
Yeah.
Right? And this is a representation of the living God.
We're all living human beings, and we need to prosper in our own unique, authentic way. God is not going to be any more glorious because you say that. God doesn't need nothing from you, but you need that.
Yeah, so I'm talking this week about this coming Sunday, which is the Sunday of the Myrrh Bearing Women.
Oh, yeah, cool.
And I wanted to start with, before we get to the text, I wanted to start with this image. This image, if you can all see that, is a painting from the 19th century, done by a British painter in the symbolist style. You can actually see this at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. It's actually on display. I saw this some years ago when I was there and made an impression on me, and I was reminded of it when I was trying to do this presentation, but it took me quite some time to actually find it again because I didn't remember what it was called or who the artist was. I'll come back to it in a minute, but I'll just start by looking at the relevant passage from the Gospel of Mark. The main part of the passage is chapter 16, or the beginning of chapter 16, but a little bit of background. I've just started partway through chapter 15. I can just read it. So this is starting in the Gospel of Mark, verse 37. But Jesus, letting out a great cry, expired, and the veil of the sanctuary was rent in two from top to bottom. And the centurion who was standing by opposite him, seeing that he had thus expired, said, "Truly this man was a God's son." Now there were also women watching from afar, among whom were Mary the Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James, and Joseph and Salome, who had followed him and attended on him when he was in Galilee, and many others who had come up with him into Jerusalem. And now that evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, which is the day before the Sabbath, there came Joseph from Arimathea, an honoured member of the council, who was himself also awaiting the kingdom of God. Taking courage, he went into Pilate and requested the body of Jesus. But Pilate was amazed that he should have died already, and summoning the centurion, asked whether he had died as yet. And learning from the centurion, he gave the corpse to Joseph. And having purchased linen cloth, he took him down, wrapped him in the linen, and placed him in a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock, and rolled a stone against the tomb's door. And Mary the Magdalene and Joseph's Mary watched where he was laid. And then chapter 16, which is, I suppose, the main part of the passage, for our purposes. And when the Sabbath had passed, Mary the Magdalene and James's Mary and Salome purchased spices so that they might come and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the Sabbath week, they come to the tomb as the sun is rising. And they said to one another, "Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?" And looking up, they see that the stone has been rolled back, for it was extremely large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting to the right, clothed in a white robe, and they were amazed. But he says to them, "Do not be amazed. You seek Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he precedes you into Galilee. There you will see him as he told you." And going out, they fled from the tomb, for trembling and bewilderment had taken hold of them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And so, of course, the reference to myrrh bearing is the reference to the spices that they bared to the tomb of Jesus. This is a representation of this scene, and it's the representation of the scene as told by Mark. And
Sure.
well, okay, it's obvious. Of course, the angel's not in a white robe, right? There's a lot of symbolist elements, but in terms of the number of figures,
Mark says a young man, that he doesn't mention actually an angel. In Matthew, you have angel.
yeah. So there's okay. So there's some interpretation going on there as well, but for example, in other scenes, there's only two women depicted. There might be two angels depicted, or other variations, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But the story behind this painting, the story behind this artist actually, is that his only daughter, died at the age of 7, and he spent really his whole artistic career trying to deal with that. And this painting, which is also sometimes called the Resurrection, is one that he painted. He actually painted it 3 times, so there are actually 3 versions of it, and 2 of the versions are actually in France and I think in the UK, but this version is actually in the upper of New South Wales. And actually, in its style, it's it's very Western and symbolist, but in its composition, it's a lot like an Orthodox icon, in a way that a lot of Western paintings from an early period are not. And actually, Spencer Stanhope, his father travelled to Greece, and so you guess perhaps that he was influenced by that to some extent. This is another depiction of the scene. This is a depiction taken more from the Gospel of Matthew, and you can see 2 women there and an angel. This is actually a famous image from Myrrh Monastery in Serbia. It was painted in the High Middle Ages. There's not that many great images. If you try to find good images of this online, they're a bit tricky to find. But this is a reasonably good one. But an interesting piece of trivia about this, which I wasn't able to track down to an initial source, so I'm not sure if it is true, although I've seen it cited in several places, is that it was broadcast by satellite as an image from Europe to the West after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, and also, I think there was in the 60s or something like that, when they launched their first missile into the space, they gathered all the masterpieces of art and they put it on some sort of a disc or capsule or something like that, and they gathered everywhere around the globe, what every country has to present. And so for Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia was the only this icon went, that piece actually, out of all, and Yugoslavia at that time was huge.
Yeah.
What's today 7 countries, just one. So actually only that part went.
They loaded images to send.
Well, they loaded masterpieces because they thought if there is some life out in space, so they launched that. in the 60s when they were just exploring and so on. So if they find something, this is what the human civilization is all about.
Yeah.
So they would take something from every country in the world, and this came from Serbia. And it's barely Anzio, the white angel, even though, as Ada says, it's actually the depiction of resurrection, because you can see the angel shows at the empty, is pointing with his finger to the empty tomb and telling to the women, you look for Jesus of Nazareth, him who's crucified. Why do you look the living? Why do you search or look for the living among the dead? Yeah. Look, the tomb is empty. Yeah. So.
Yes, so... Yes,
It's actually second icon, actually. It's actually the second layer. There is earlier frescoes below. Can you see there?
Oh, yeah.
That's
I
right.
read, I think that this has been restored in the 20th century.
But even before, there was something else behind there that was done earlier than the 13th century. This is 13th century. Yeah.
So they just said, I'll just paint over what this guy did and I'll make something better.
Yeah, and they did. they didn't want to go behind what they did.
A lot of monasteries, though, and I know even in Macedonia,
There's soldiers here,
Serbia,
you can see.
were destroyed. And I know there's this big monastery in Macedonia. When you go in, they haven't touched it, where the burn marks are still there from the Ottoman times. So where half the icon will be missing. And
Well, Bitola used to be called Manastiri.
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Well, you have that. That is a totally. What I'm trying to say here in the 15th until later. Sorry to interrupt. Until what they did, for example, especially in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, especially 18th century was kind of time of freedom and enlightenment and so on. What they did with all these middle-aged monasteries, they would put a layer of cement, and they would put new frescoes, new icons on top of these, because over the centuries they couldn't see what's there and so on, or they would just think, okay, we're going to make something new, and so they would make holes, put a new layer of cement and new frescoes, and that's in almost 90% of monasteries in Serbia. And then in the 70s, they took that off, saying, okay, this is more valuable, not because it's older, but because it's more authentic.
Yeah.
But what I actually admire with these people who lived in the 18th centuries, they understood the church as their own house. They didn't understand that as a relic from the past that they have to keep only because it's 500 years old or whatever. This is our place of worship, and we're going to make it nice for us. Doesn't matter what they enjoyed 500 years ago. This is what we like now, and we're going to put something new. All right. And I think that's the point. The church is a living church of those living people of that age.
Not just a relic.
It's not just a relic. They didn't consider it's valuable to conserve something only because it's 300-400 years of age. They put a new layer. This is
Nice.
So one point. So there are a few points to emphasize about a text, and the reason I included the portion before, I think, from about verse 43, I think is the prescribed reading for Sunday, but I've included a bit before that, because it's important that the three women who go to the tomb and see that it's empty are three women who are standing and observing Jesus as he dies. And they're witnesses of that, and then they are witnesses of where he's buried and where the tomb is, that he's placed there, and then they're witnesses that the tomb is empty. That's a role which they play, even though they're not, they're not characters introduced really earlier in the story. For the most part, they're not like the 12 disciples who have sort of major starring roles throughout. There's in the Western tradition, there's sometimes an identification of Mary Magdalene with a prostitute in some of the earlier passages, and some of these figures get identified together, but there's no reason for the text to do that. this ending to this passage, which unfortunately is slightly hidden by this window, which... Oh, good.
IT genius.
Is, it's a bit paradoxical, right? That the man or the angel, as we perhaps imagine him to be, says to them, go out and tell all the disciples, and they don't, right? At least not initially, right? They go out and they say nothing to anyone because they're afraid. And this is quite characteristic of the way that Mark's Gospel is written. It's a bit paradoxical. You say one thing and then another thing, you go, what? But there's usually a meaning behind that. And one of the things that happens just a little bit earlier, actually in chapter 14 of Mark, if you recall, is that, I'm not going to read all of this passage, but this is the passage where a woman comes with a very expensive bottle of anointing oil and pours it over Jesus' head. Judas in particular is, although in Mark it's the disciples in general, are kind of a bit disturbed by this because it's a very expensive bottle of oil that's been poured out. They say, why didn't you sell it and give the money to the poor? But part of what Jesus says in response to that, and this is, from verse 7, for you always have the destitute with you, and you can do good to them whenever you wish, but you do not always have me. She did what she could. She has anointed my body in anticipation for burial. So actually, in a sense, Jesus is prepared for burial before he dies. On the other hand, we can look back to the beginning of Jesus' life and think about myrrh. Probably the first thing you think about when you think about myrrh is the passage from the beginning of, I suppose that's chapter 2 of Matthew's Gospel, in which the wise men or the magi, or we want to translate the idea of Zoroastrian priests or Persian wise men coming from the east, and they bring frankincense and myrrh, and there are 3 of them. Right? And this is, I think, an interesting symmetry that this happens at the beginning of Jesus' life, and it also happens at the end, or actually sort of somehow after the end, although actually at the new beginning, right? At the,
like his new
sort
birth
his
in a
new
way.
birth
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah.
Which I think is an interesting comparison. I should just make a point about these icons, for example. You can see in this is not really an icon, but there are icons you can find with very similar composition, has 3 figures, and this icon has 2 figures, 2 women. Both of them have 1 angel, right? But this first one corresponds more to the description in Mark. This one corresponds more to the description in Matthew, where there are only 2 women mentioned. I think in Luke there's 2 angels mentioned and 3 women, but they're given slightly different names to the names in Mark. And in John, Peter is also there at some point. And so if you were to try to think about these from the perspective of a modern historian, or if you would try to treat them as, documents witnessing in a court, it doesn't make a lot of sense somehow, because you go, well, how many people were there, and which people were they, and how many angels were there, and these sorts of questions.
And in Mark, it's not an angel. It's a young man.
It's a young man.
That's right. And it's a young man from the chapter 13, actually. Yeah, I'll mention that later.
Yeah,
there is actually a young man. Yeah, Jesus met. And
because I haven't picked up on that, because I sort of thought it was probably.
So why are they not all on the same page?
Well, that's what I'm going to
Because
come
it's
to
true.
in a minute.
Because it's true.
I'm making this digression because I'm not making. They're not purely rhetorical questions. I am going to answer them to a degree, and I'm going to sort of answer them by showing you this image, which I don't know if you know this image. This is, again, a very famous image from the Book of Kells, which is circa 800. It's an Anglo-Saxon illuminated manuscript.
It's a gospel.
Right? And it's a gospel book.
Yeah.
That's right. And, it is Orthodox imagery because it's prior to the schism, but also just the form is as well, even though it's got an Anglo-Saxon style as opposed to a Byzantine style.
Yeah, well, it's very Byzantine.
Well, it's got a lot of Byzantine
Influence,
but this sort of illuminated manuscript is very Anglo-Saxon. And this image is meant to represent the four evangelists, the four gospel writers. It's a bit weird, like one of them's an eagle and one of them's one of them's represented as a
Angel
or a lion, right?
And
but the reason for this, there's a reason for this, right? These images don't come out of nowhere, and they actually come out of the writings of the church fathers. And the earliest church father to mention this is Irenaeus from in the 2nd century, and I'm not going to read this all of this quote from
Can I just say,
Irenaeus.
for all of you, Irenaeus says, I am the disciple of Polycarp, and Polycarp is the disciple of John, who laid on the breast of Jesus. So this is, if there is an early father, this is one of the earliest fathers. Yeah. So he's just the 2nd generation after the apostles. Yeah.
And Irenaeus says, and this is, I suppose this is in response to two possible paths you could take. Maybe more, but two possible paths you could take when you think about what a modern scholar or a Protestant might think of as contradictions, right? Is one possible approach would be, we'll just pick one of the Gospels that we like better and reject the others, right? And this is essentially what Marcion did, the 2nd century heretic. He picked the Gospel of Luke, right, a particular version of it, and he said, and a few letters of Paul, and he said, this is the canon. We're going to throw away the Old Testament and any other books, right, because this is at least consistent, and we know how this works, so we'll just go with that. On the other hand, you could produce a gospel harmony. And we know many of these were produced from the 2nd century, just about as soon as there were 4 Gospels floating around in one manuscript. We know that people tried to sort of mesh them together into the one narrative and combine stories out of one with stories out of the others. But it's important that the Church Fathers didn't pick one of those and say, well, this is really the correct story, and try to remove the diversity among the Gospel stories by trying to harmonise them. And that's true in the Old Testament canon. I mean, you have the Book of Chronicles and the books of Chronicles and the books of Kings, which sort of talk about the same periods of time, but there was no attempt to sort of merge them together and just have one coherent narrative. They say slightly different things, but they're making different comments about them. And this is Irenaeus' sort of response to why actually having 4 Gospels is an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And he says, it is not possible that the Gospels can be either more or fewer in number than they are. For since there are 4 zones of the world in which we live, and 4 principal winds, while the church is scattered throughout all the world, and the pillar and ground of the church is the gospel and the spirit of life, it is fitting that she should have 4 pillars, breathing out immortality on every side, and vivifying men afresh. For which fact it is evident that the Word, the artificer of all, he that sits upon the cherubim, and contains all things, he who is manifested to men, has given us the gospel under 4 aspects, but bounded together by one Spirit. As also David says when entreating his manifestation, you that sits between the cherubim shine forth, for the cherubim too were 4-faced, and their faces were the images of the dispensation of the Son of God. And these 4 images, or these 4 faces, I should say, of the cherubim, is taken from the book of Ezekiel. And these 4 beasts in Ezekiel are exactly the lion and the eagle and the man
and the oxen
and the ox.
And the ox, yeah.
And so this particular there is a particular identification of which evangelist goes with which image. But this is a thing picked up by other church fathers, and they kind of disagree about which which one the eagle corresponds to, or which one the man
Oh
corresponds
no,
to.
Everyone
no.
wants to be
I
the
think
eagle.
it was formulated quite early. They did have a
I might be wrong about that, but
eagle is John,
the eagle is John.
angel is Matthew, or man or angel.
Man
Sometimes
or angel,
he's
yeah.
a man, sometimes he's an angel, and then ox is Luke, and then Mark is lion.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So that's what's. I think that's certainly the most common combination. But I had heard of that. But they're not sort of making these identifications to say, to necessarily say that John was actually an eagle, whatever that might mean. But they're usually making the identification. And Irenaeus actually does this. If you read the rest of this passage, it goes on some way, and he talks about why John is represented by an eagle and what sense that makes, and makes a comparison through that. But so the point is, right, that just as you've got 4 pillars or 4 compass directions or 4 aspects, 4 faces, this actually gives you strength rather than being a weakness. And so
a table, yeah.
yeah,
And
that's
4
right. If
legs
you've got
to
a
hold it
table,
up.
it needs
Yeah,
4, I guess it would do with 3 legs, right? The table, but that's, the exact number is not the point. The point is that actually, if you only, that somehow more is not necessarily, something being complicated doesn't make it worse, right? You don't need to adhere to this Platonic idea that simplicity is always better, right? One is always better than many. This is not.
You have 4 different versions of the Lord's Prayer in 4 Gospels. I mean, go through it and you'll see. Why do we use only one and not,
I thought it was a translation thing. That's all.
No. No, 4 different versions in Greek, in original.
Yeah, okay.
4 different versions. And the church has picked one for a reason. And so different narratives, because it's true. Because you have those myths and legends where they would, make sure not to put these things inside, because as Marcion thought, obviously, and many others, Gnostics, all the Gnostics would say, no, get rid of the Old Testament. This is a violent God. He's just deterring people
It's
from.
too complicated. I don't understand how this works. So I'm going to get rid of
let's get rid of it and
Yeah.
bury it. Yeah.
This is sort of,
And other factors. It wasn't just that. That was also it. But then they had this theory that this God of the Old Testament was a violent God, and then he changes, and then you have this theology of God actually being one, but he just shows different 3 faces to us, which means that God actually acts, and he doesn't show his true self to us, but he kind of pretends that he's Father at one point, and then he pretends that he's Son at the other point, and then he pretends that he's the Holy Spirit. But, where's the truth there?
It's a bit goofy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. God is like, it's a show kind of thing. And he kind of puts masks on.
Yeah. Right.
and I should say that this point is
Like
actually
God is playing
addressed.
with us, sorry.
Yeah.
Is actually addressed within the Gospel of John, right? Because John sort of takes a different tack to the other Gospel writers. His narratives are not necessarily in chronological order in the same way. He's not trying to present at first he was born and then he did this and then he did. They're more thematically structured and a bit cyclically structured. And they tell to some extent a different set of stories than are told in the other 3 Gospels, which largely have the same overall narrative structure. And John says, there's 2 little bits where he says it, but in John 20, verse 30 and 31, he says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Right, so in other words, he's not writing it to provide a record for future historians or to provide, evidence in a court for something, or, because the video camera hasn't been invented, but he wants to do what he can in the meantime.
It's like, one day.
You're so funny.
And he says it again in 21:25, which is chapter 21 sort of an epilogue, I guess, added again onto the end. He says, "Now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written." Right? And we maybe think, oh, that's hyperbole. He's just saying, if I wrote down all the stuff, I'd like never be finished. It would take me forever. Right? But that's not, it's not really, he's not really being hyperbolic in that way. He's actually, I think, means what he says, that were every one of them to be written, the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Right? This is actually important as to how we interpret the Gospels and all of Scripture, that actually, if you had to say everything that had to be said, you'd have to know somehow the whole mind of God. There's somehow there's so much more that could be said, right? But it couldn't be contained in a book. If you did that, that's not a book. That would be a brain transplant from
God.
Yeah, but that's my brief digression, and this is I did this because this passage is something that is in 4 Gospels, but it's a bit different each time, and John in particular is somehow the most different. But other passages maybe I just sort of left out of one Gospel, or they're in one Gospel and not another, or maybe they're reordered. But this is a case where, I mean, you can make them match up. You can say, well, this author didn't mention this other figure. Maybe, there were just lots of myrrh bearers. You can sort of harmonise them. You can do that. But the church didn't choose to do that in its gospel texts. They didn't pick a harmony and say, this is the official record. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the scene where the women enter the tomb, or at least look into it. This is an image of the raising of Lazarus. It's not a terribly good picture of it, but this is actually out of a book. This is a great book, Ouspensky and Losky, The Meaning of Icons. And this has a list of icons, actually for a lot of the important feast days and a lot of the Sundays of the year. It's an icon for each one listed, and also different icons for the Mother of God and different icons of Jesus are listed. And there's an explanation given as to why they include what they include, and what we should take out of the symbols that are in them, and why they represent the scenes, generally, mostly in the Gospels, the scenes that they do. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to Lazarus, who is the figure who looks like an Egyptian mummy, right? Because he's wrapped up in robes, which, if you remember from the passage, it was said that Jesus was also wrapped up in burial clothes after he died.
So Lazarus is one of the 3 people that Jesus raised.
Yes, I should say. So Lazarus and that's Lazarus Saturday, which is about a week before Pascha, and there's a contrast here, right? If we compare this icon to actually this icon, I don't know if you noticed, but over on the left-hand side, you can see the burial clothes of Jesus sort of appear to be wound up there. And actually, the Gospels are kind of specific about this. I mean, John, for example, says that Peter came and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Right, so there is a focus on what the burial cloths look like. That's actually
Sorry, I just had to admit, people are sending me messages. What is the meeting on? We're talking for the past 40 minutes, and 3 people are waiting. They're in the waiting room, and I did not have noticed. I'm sorry. I do apologize to everyone. Ada will send you this presentation.
I ended up, for some reason, losing
Oh, right, yeah, but I think also, yeah, Gorjana's here and Bobby's here, so my apologies for you. I just didn't pay attention to, because we're here at the church and then I was looking or talking about something. Sorry. Sorry.
Yeah. Anyway,
I know it's
so
hard. But you
so
mentioned
so I mentioned
the burial
the
cloths.
burial cloths,
Yeah,
which
that's right, yeah.
you can see on the left-hand side of this icon, and the Gospels. Mark, I don't think mentions it, but in the other Gospels, mention is made of the fact that they're in the tomb, and there's some sort of mention of the way they're folded up, or the way that there's actually that's something sort of emphasising. You would think, well, why are they talking about the burial cloths? I mean, just what's that about? I mean, does anyone care whether there were bits of cloth in the? Surely that's not the point. Surely the point is the body's not there anyway, right? But actually, the way Lazarus is raised here, you can see that he's raised still wrapped in burial cloths. Whereas Jesus, when he's raised in a somewhat different sense, right? He's raised into a not any longer into a mortal body, right? Because Lazarus is raised, but he dies again, right? He's not raised in the same way that Jesus is raised. It's a sign of that, right? But it's a sign of the resurrection, but it's not really the beginning of the resurrection as such. And so the burial cloths are sort of there to indicate that Jesus didn't just sort of, get up in his mortal body in the burial cloths and walk over to the door and get an angel to roll the rock out of the way for him and walk out. And actually, this is another point that
So it shouldn't be called raising of Lazarus or resurrection of Lazarus. It should be called something else, precisely because of this. All these people whom Jesus healed, or he rose these 3 people from the dead, they will die eventually. Yeah. It's not resurrection. It's more coming back to life. To this same
resuscitation, maybe.
It's this very same life, because they will die later on. It's
woken from the dream.
Sorry?
Woken from a deep dream.
They were dead. That's why it's mentioned that he was 4 days dead.
Because like the girl, when he raised her, he told them she's sleeping.
But they all make fun of him. And that's right. Yeah. But they all the type of that they're coming back into this reality, whereas Jesus, what Ada wants to say, I guess, because his body is not wrapped in those cloths, burial cloths. The point is, he is something totally different, something that you can't imagine. His body is beyond and above our experience.
So when he rose, he had his official body that he came from his father?
Who, Jesus?
Yeah, when he rose.
No, it was his body, definitely, because the first thing that Jesus shows to those disciples when he appears, after his resurrection, he says, "Oh, I'm not a ghost. Okay. I'm not a ghost. Touch me, see that it's me, and give me something to eat."
Oh, so he's not a Holy Spirit yet.
Well, it's a special body where the Spirit governs and lords and rules the body. And that's, I guess, the goal of all philosophy, I guess, where the Spirit dominates the body, where you're not limited with your body. We're now limited with our bodies. Yeah. I guess, I want to be 20,000 k's, I want to see my mom, but I can't because my body is in here. And so our bodies are... But the Spirit my Spirit can be, 30,000 k's somewhere in Europe or whatever. Well, for Jesus, that's not the case. Well, we don't know what kind of body it is, but it is a body. Yeah. A body that it's not just a spirit, it's not just a soul. Yeah.
But is it like a spirit that enters another body, like takes over a body?
No, absolutely not.
A spooky ghost.
No, that's reincarnation.
When they talk, they recognise him, so they recognise that it's him. But I'm thinking on one day his spirit entered a body, a living body.
No, it is his body, but his body rules and governs and his spirit governs his body. It is his body, but it's a different body. That's why we know it's a body, because in every appearance there is 11 appearances of Jesus after resurrection, and we read that every Sunday. That's why we have those 11 resurrection gospels. Matins, that's right, Matins. So every Sunday on Matins before liturgy, where we have 2 or 3 people, unfortunately, please come on Matins, Sunday Matins, because we read these resurrections throughout the year, throughout the whole year. We read these 11 different. So we change, Today, last Sunday, it was the second resurrection, the first resurrection gospel. Now it's going to be the second, the third, the fourth, and so on. There is 11, and then we change again. Anyways, in each and every one of them, Jesus proves that he's not a spirit, because don't underestimate those people from the first century. They knew all about ghosts and their superstitions and so on. They weren't superstitious. They were afraid, and the first thing they kind of thought, "Oh, this is a ghost." And Jesus says, "No, touch me, see me, put your hands in my wounds or in my side, and give me something to eat." And he broke the bread and gave it to them, and so on. So he is a person with body. Absolutely, and it is his body, but they can't recognize him still. And you'll see that they cannot recognize him.
like the brother knows.
They can't recognize him.
Yeah.
But then his body goes through the door being shut, like we've been saying last Sunday, St. Thomas Sunday. So the door's being shut, and he appears to them. And so John clearly could have missed this detail that the doors were shut, but he does not. He mentions it, and he mentions it twice actually. The doors are shut, and he appears in the midst of them. It means that his spirit his body is now not limited, like our bodies are limited.
Yes.
So he's crossing these limits of this space and time, and you name it.
So he has a human body in the sense that he has all the abilities and capacities of a human body.
Absolutely.
But while he's sort of before his resurrection, he has sort of some of the limitations of that body in that he has to eat. This sort of thing.
And he dies.
After his resurrection, he still has the abilities of a human body, the capacities of a human being, but without having the limitations that would normally be attached to
Absolutely.
that.
Very well said.
Okay.
Can I just make a comment about back to the burial cloth and all that? The idea that Christ doesn't have the cloth on him when he's raised, would that be somewhat connected to when Adam and Eve put the clothes on when the fall happens, as in like a reference to when you know what I mean, like
Absolutely.
because I think I read it in the Orthodox Study Bible or something like having to clothe yourself is like a symptom of the fallen world or something like that. You know what I mean?
Well,
And then like the new creation and the resurrection.
Yeah, it is the new
Like this
creation.
idea of the garments of skin. I guess in a sense that that this kind of, and I actually will come on to talk about this in a minute, but the way we deal with dead people, right? That's kind of a technology actually. The fact that we would wrap them up in this case, or nowadays we bury them, but we have headstones and we have funerals and this sort of thing. But I am going to come on to that actually quite soon. Yes, well, actually, more or less now. But just before I get there, I just want to say that the other point about the grave clothes, and the thing that's linked up with that, is that the reason that the stone is rolled away from the tomb, right? We're led to believe that it's by the angel, perhaps, that's there, right? That's one of the things one interpretation you could take from the text, that it's been rolled away by this angel. It's not been rolled away to let Jesus out. Right? It's not like he didn't get up in his grave clothes and need the stone rolled away for him and then
You could have
walk
walked
out.
through it, couldn't you?
Well, that's
Well, doors being shut.
So the reason the gravestone is rolled away is so that the women can see that it's empty.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Not to let him out, but in order that they can see that it's empty and they can really be that the women in
They can enter the grave.
they can enter, and especially in Mark,
The tomb, yeah.
especially in Mark, the disciples are pretty clueless, right through the gospel. They're used as like comic foils, almost in a literary sense, right? There's almost some of it, and they don't get the parables. They go, but what do you mean? But the author is actually talking to the reader all the way. Mark is talking to the reader all the way through and explaining what Jesus means.
What about
But actually, in a sense, certainly in Mark's gospel, I would say that the first people to understand the meaning of the gospel are the women at that moment, and at that moment they run away because they were afraid, and they're the first people to really get
Understand,
it.
yeah.
They get it,
Understand.
they go,
before that event happened, didn't the guards saw the angel come down and open the thing, and they fell on the floor, and they told the thing that,
I
but
think that's in Luke's account.
It's in Luke's gospel, that's right.
so
In Luke's gospel.
This is
yes.
one
yeah.
well, I believe that one, so I've just come across that
It's
one.
all true. If you can't
And then-
pick and choose,
yeah, and
it's
then-
all the gospel.
And then like they told the kings whatever, and they paid off not to believe into
all the
it.
guards.
There is that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the point that's made in. It is Luke.
Yeah, it is in
still
Luke, yeah,
where
yeah,
that-
So that happened
when
before
it's made?
this. If we
Historically, we don't actually care what
Okay.
historically happened because we're reading the message, because the Bible sends you a theological message. What happened before or after is not so important. Like the washing of feet happened on a mystical supper. Was the washing of feet before or after they had supper? Doesn't really matter. We're talking about the message. Historically, what happened. That doesn't really matter because all these are sending us a message, and we're trying to figure out what is the theological meaning of all of this. Yeah.
I should just say the way Matthew actually tells that is that the women, in this case it's Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, calls them, were there when the angels descended and rolled away the stone, rather than being already rolled away. And then the guards go from there. So, but when the guards act, it's sort of after this has happened, or after, I guess, the earlier scene. But so I mean, that's the.
because it makes sense with the guards. Because remember when the Pharisees said that this could be worse than the first lie. Like when they said after 3 days Jesus arise, they said, in case they pull him out and then they can make the things worse. So that's why they send the guards. They say it makes sense for the guards to be there.
Yeah, and also I think a very important theological message here is that we ourselves enter into life only through tomb. We need to enter into death. And if you remember the service on Great Holy Friday, where we go outside of the church in procession with a shroud, and then the priest stands at the entrance, and you have to go underneath the shroud in order to enter. Right. So you need to go through the death of Christ as well. So we're actually entering into that too.
Because overseas, I don't know if you, for Lazarus, there's up in the mountains like a hole, and we all go down with a rope for good luck, or like something to represent the tomb, like you said, like we're going through a hole. I don't know, it was some tradition.
We need to go through death, definitely.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what, you either go once or 3 times. You slide down.
Probably what that means. Or the same thing.
Never heard. Sorry.
All right. So next, I was going to get a picture for this, but I thought it would be a bit too silly. I'm going to talk briefly about elephants.
All right.
And I simply want to make the point that an unusual thing about the psychology and the sociology, if you like, of elephants is that they actually have a process for dealing with death. They have some
Yeah.
understanding of death. Elephants can recognize a dead elephant as a dead elephant that used to be alive, and they go through some process that resembles, I mean, obviously they haven't got spades, so they can't do burial as such. They will pick up, perhaps palm fronds or things and lay them over the elephant, and
Yeah.
they'll go through a process of mourning, right? Even for elephants they didn't previously know, right? And this is very unusual in the animal kingdom. Very few animals, have this real understanding of death. You find mothers, will mourn for dead infants. That's relatively common across the animal kingdom. But beyond that sort of extremely close tie, you don't necessarily have this kind of understanding or this ritual associated with death in other animal species apart from elephants and some cetaceans, dolphins, and some monkeys or apes. And this is important, right? Because part of the passage we read at the beginning was that Joseph of Arimathea, right, actually said, "I want to bury the body of Jesus," right? And this, some ways you might think, well, he's dead now, it's all over, show over, what's the point?
Yeah.
He's been crucified as a criminal, right? Why are you bothering burying him, really? I mean, he can be thrown into a mass grave with the rest of the convicts. Or, he goes to quite a lot of expense to do this, right? But this is something you pick up on in the Old Testament. Just occurred to me, but I think it's Abraham who buys a plot of land
Yes,
to bury, Sarah?
Yes.
And he spends a significant amount of money to buy this plot of land specifically in order to bury his wife. But you find this, in other ancient literature, right? In the Iliad, which is a major Greek epic poem. The whole of Book 24 is about the body of Hector, who has been killed by Achilles in revenge for his killing Proclus. But Achilles, through anger, refuses to give up the body of Hector to his father, Priam. But Priam wants to bury Hector. And so Book 24 is about him sort of agonizing over this, and eventually Priam actually goes in secret to Achilles and begs him, right? Priam, who is this king of Troy, right? And he goes and begs at the feet of Achilles. And eventually the body's returned, and this is the conclusion of the Iliad. So this is one of the most important elements of that text. I mean, you can see the effort that the Egyptians went to with the mummies, and there's a lot of outlay there, and a lot of complex process around that. And this is something that human beings do, which is pretty unusual in the animal kingdom, and something that human beings have needed to do since the fall, right? Since death was introduced into the world. And this is there's a technology grown up around that, including the grave cloths, that we can move beyond through the resurrection. And that's part of what's going on with the grave clothes being left behind. Yeah. And I just wanted to sort of just about conclude by saying that another image is going on here with the tomb and the fact that it's sealed, and it's important that Gospel authors, I think all of them, mention that it's closed up with a rock, right? And there's witnesses to the fact that it's closed up. And then it's opened. And opened miraculously, right? And this is really a sign of death, of Hades, as a prison that has been broken out of. And Christ is leading a prison revolt among the dead.
Very good.
That's cool. That's really cool.
And so I found this. This is a passage from the Paschal Homily of St. John Chrysostom,
that's right.
which I think is normally read on Matins, of Pascha.
Yeah.
And well, I think it's worth reading it actually.
Yeah.
This is just a paragraph from toward the end, but enjoy all ye the feast of faith. Receive ye all the riches of loving kindness. Let no one bewail his poverty, for the universal kingdom has been revealed. Let no one weep for his iniquities, for pardon has shone forth from the grave. Let no one fear death, for the Saviour's death has set us free. He that was held prisoner of it has annihilated it. By descending into hell, he made hell captive. He embittered it when he tasted of his flesh. And Isaiah, foretelling this, did cry, Hell, said he, was embittered when it encountered thee in the lower regions. It was embittered, for it was abolished. It was embittered, for it was mocked. It was embittered, for it was slain. It was embittered, for it was overthrown. It was embittered, for it was fettered in chains. It took a body and met God face to face. It took earth and encountered heaven. It took that which was seen and fell upon the unseen.
Can I just say that in the tradition of the church, when we read this, I did this in Serbian here, but when it says here, it when we start, because many times Chrysostom repeats, even though it's disputable whether Chrysostom is the author of this one, says he embittered it when it tasted on his flesh, and the whole congregation says he embittered it. You know, the whole church says he embittered it, and he says when it comes to where am I? He embittered his. And Isaiah foretelling this did cry, hell, said he, was embittered. And everyone says, was embittered. When it encountered thee in the lower regions, it was embittered. And everyone says, it was embittered. It's really powerful, actually, when we say that. So remember that. That's a really powerful thing when we say, yes, it was embittered.
Yeah, he told them, yeah.
So how many days was he on earth before he went back to his father? 40 days, was it? Or?
Yeah, 40 days. 40 days. Yeah.
So after the 40th day, he took Adam and Eve from...
On the 40th day. No. He took Adam and Eve. Well, we say on the third day he rose from the dead, which means he rose from the dead. And we see that on the icon of resurrection, on the Pascha icon, is he's taking Adam and Eve from hell. He's taking them with him because he went to hell in order to destroy it, and then he's setting everyone free from that jail, from hell. Yeah.
I mean, I think this would make a good film.
And it shows like...
Because I think you could make this as a good spy film, right? Because really what Jesus does in the plot of a modern spy novel is he goes in disguise to this giant prison complex. And then he got
all these gadgets and he's like...
and I mean, this is told in the Gospel of Nicodemus. You can read this, right? And I think it's Satan, hell and Satan have a conversation, and I think Satan says, "What have you done?" He said, "I don't know that this is going to go so well," because they think they've won. They think they've captured the Messiah. They think they've, but really it's God, and He's come to destroy
He also has a
them.
message in the icon, or explaining one, so I didn't know, like when Jesus takes out Adam and Eve, he grabs them. They don't hold like this, he grabs them by the
grabs them.
Yes.
Well, of course, he's got the initiative, not they.
And so I mean the resurrection is in that sense, it is a prison break, right? It's a revolt. A prison revolt. And you hear this, this is a phrase we say quite a lot in the services from, I guess it's Psalm 142, bring my soul out of prison. so that I may praise your name. Bring my soul out of prison. And this phrase is repeated a couple of times, but this is part of what the empty tomb represents, is it's a prison that's been broken out of and is now empty.
That psalm should be sung on every liturgy as the second antiphon, by the way. Bring my soul out of prison.
142.
So I'll just make a
Oh,
final.
no, it's on every Vespers. Sorry, it's on every Vespers. Every Vespers.
Yes,
Yeah, it's
I
on every
remember it
Vespers.
being
Yeah,
said.
yeah.
But
What is Vespers?
Evening service, evening prayer. Yeah.
So I'm used to Slavic talk, when it comes to...
Večernje.
Yeah,
Večernje.
okay. I'm
Vespers
not
is večernje.
usually used to English, like liturgia and all that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know the
Vespers
word.
is večernje, Matins is jutrenje, liturgija is liturgija. All the time. Yeah.
So I just wanted to return to this, and particularly return to the name of this painting, which is taken out of the phrase in the Gospel of Luke, and this is the King James translation of this phrase, which is that one of the angels says to the three women, it says it down there. I won't give more context. I'll just say that he says, "Why seek ye the living among the dead? Why seek ye the living among the dead?" And this is really important, right? That the God of the Scriptures and the God in both in the Old Testament and the New Testament is a living God.
So why do they use that kind of language? Why seek ye when you could just simplify in a more...
Well, it's King James English. That was the English at the
okay.
time. It was translated in the
1611.
was it early 17th
16th
century.
century,
Yeah, early 17th century. But I mean, some of it's based
So
on
is it
the
like
Tyndale.
slangish English words? Or is
No,
it...
it's. I mean, ye. What used to be the first? It's supposed to be the.
It's the Old English.
Well, it's normally. The relevant words are going out of my head, but it's normally the
Ye is
form
you,
that you would put in the subject.
Oh, okay, yeah.
When you would put in the object.
Yeah.
So I hit you, but ye hit something
Yeah, okay,
like this
yeah.
sort of thing. But
That's the young man.
I
So
see.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
From the
So
chapter,
what's that? What's that like?
chapter 14, verse 51 in Gospel of Mark.
Oh.
And the young man followed him with nothing but a linen cloth about his
the
body.
Right, the naked guy,
The
yeah.
naked guy.
I remember I saw a video that
Yes,
said
the
that
naked
he
guy.
was...
Yeah. And they seized
resurrected.
him, but he left the linen cloth and ran away naked.
Some say that naked guy is actually Mark himself.
All right. The naked guy is
He
there.
immediately starts writing.
He's obviously under the influence of this world, demons, whatever it is.
Okay.
Now, the fathers of the church say that this man is now being baptized. He is now the follower of Jesus because he appears there in chapter 16.
Can I have a look at something? Yeah.
They saw the stone was in the room, and they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed.
Oh, what's this?
Who's dressed in a white robe on Great and Holy Saturday? The church baptizes all those on Great and Holy Saturday, on Resurrection Day.
Oh, wow.
You need to understand this as a liturgical text.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
the church has written this with a purpose, and there is the Great Lent is going on, and we're naked. And now we become Christians, we become followers of Christ, and we become witnesses of resurrection.
Yeah.
Now this man who was insane, what not, he's now a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in now he's dressed because he's witness of resurrection. Now the chapter 14, verse 51, young man was following him. So he was following, we were all following him, but especially those who are preparing to be baptized, because Great Lent is the time when usually people were preparing to be baptized, and then they would be baptized on Great and Holy Saturday on that night, on that Easter night. Yeah.
I just So
Whereas in Matthew, it is actually an angel. In Luke, angels. But in Mark, it's actually a young man. Yeah.
yes, for some reason I just interpreted it as someone. He looked like a young man to them.
Yeah. But the fathers are actually interpreting, making
Right,
that
okay.
connection with preparation and baptism and all of that, and putting on a white robe and baptism and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does that color represent at the moment? Black.
It means that during the Ottoman rule, we were forbidden to wear white.
Is that really? Oh.
Yeah, because it was reserved for the Ottomans to wear white,
Okay.
and it was said for the Christians to wear only black, because Ottoman is one of the theories. I don't know. Even though in the Western Church they also wear black. I'm not too sure. It doesn't.
That's the colour of mourning as well.
Sorry.
It's the colour of mourning.
No, with the faith of joy, of resurrection.
Especially all the holy
It's
months.
also it's the color of, when you want to wear something really, like black cars, they're posh cars.
Yeah. Okay.
I like black.
high
Makes it
class.
look skinnier. So.
High class. So it's not really, death and mourning and whatnot. It's more like a level up.
Because I see
High class.
because I see the monks all wear black. The monks.
Yes, but you see, in the back in the days, you can have you see many colors, colors. Saint John of Kronstadt, the famous priest from Russia from the 19th century, when you see his cassock, this is called cassock in English, mantia. It's all in roses and in silk and this and that. So he was really kind of
Like a ninja.
all that. Yeah.
Ninjas.
Now the
And
Chinese
Russians do
karate.
have, for example, the Russian priests, they would wear white cassocks from Easter all the way to Pentecost.
Oh, they're all red.
You have red as well? You have red as well?
Who's the monk with the bear?
Did Seraphim wear
what?
black?
No, he was wearing white.
White?
Father Saint Seraphim Sarov,
Yeah.
he was wearing white.
Now, because isn't he here? That him? Seraphim?
That's him, yeah.
Why
that's
it's colored
him.
black
Yeah.
there?
It is black, but you have icons where he wears
Icons.
white, yeah. Doesn't really matter. Yeah. Sorry, Ada, we interrupted you. Sorry,
That's right.
resolution.
I'm this close to being finished, but I just wanted to make just one or two small points about this idea of a living God,
Yeah.
which is continually it's often used in as a contrast in the Old Testament with the dead gods of the other nations. Right? You see this with the Egyptian gods and the way they're treated by Moses, right? That they're shown to be dead, right? They're shown to be ineffective. They're shown to be kind of, they're not perhaps totally, they're not meaningless as spiritual forces, right? The priests of the Egyptians are able to produce some of the plagues, but they're shown to be ultimately impotent, right? They're ultimately dead. And this you see again with the contest between Elijah and the priests of Baal. That Baal is shown, that God can quite easily tie Baal's hands, and that's it, right? And there's this little bit from the from Deuteronomy 5:26. For who there is of all flesh that hath heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as we have, and lived. And this is, I think, by one count, this phrase, the living God, appears 30 times in the King James translation, but the words living and God appear together many more times than that. And this is reflected in a lot of other symbols. There's Aaron's staff, Aaron's rod that buds in Numbers. On the next day, Moses went into the tent of the testimony, and behold, the staff of Aaron for the house of Levi had sprouted and put forth buds and produced blossoms, and it bore ripe almonds. So this walking stick, right, kind of that Aaron has, actually comes back to life.
Yeah.
Right, and this is a representation of the living God, and you see this actually in the church with the budding crosses. And unfortunately I didn't have time to find a good image of this, but I'm not sure how to explain it. But they're the crosses really that are used, I think, everywhere on the interior of the church that have got the knobbly bits on the end, right? That sort of represent the cross, which is this instrument of death, itself coming back to life and being a symbol
Isn't
of
the
life.
cross to replace
rather
the
than
tree of knowledge?
Tree of life as well, yeah.
And Mary replaces Eve's sin, and what was the
that's
other one?
right.
Yeah.
It is the foreshadowing.
Christ
yeah,
is
that's
a
right.
new Adam.
That's it.
Yeah.
But I think this is so important, this conclusion, Ada, that you made about the living God, because, and that's a message for each and every one of us. And that is what we can read from the four Gospels and all these different accounts and the four different Lord's Prayers, that we are all have our own perspective, and God does not want us to be all have one mind, one way, unified and so on. And the number of liturgies that we have, the number of services and so on, we are all living human beings, and we need to prosper in our own unique, authentic way. And that's what God wants us to, He has given us different separate talents, authentic talents, and He wants this to blossom, and He wants us to flower. He wants us to be living as He is the living one. And we can do that only if we are with Him, if we respond to His calling, if we open up. No, right.
Yeah, alive now. We're living. Is that why? Is that a little related to how God says, "I am that I am"? Like,
Yes, that's
I
so
am alive
important.
right now.
He-
Always.
yeah.
What's
the existing one, on.
the Greek that you have on
Egomir.
that you see on the
Yeah.
on the icons or
It is
around the
or
cross.
on. It is the existing one, or I am who I am, but it is the existing one.
I was listening
The being, I'm the being itself.
I was watching last night on YouTube, like a old father, Saint Monk, was talking, like he was saying that without God, you can be the most knowledgeable, the most smartest, degrees, powerful. Satan will demoralize you, like he's that powerful. Without God, we cannot defeat him. And he said that if God gave him the rights, he could destroy this world within a second. Is that powerful? But
Who could destroy this world?
if God gave him the rights to, he'd devour the world.
But it is in God's hands.
Yeah. But he was trying to say that if God gave him the rights, he could devour this. He was trying to say how powerful, how wise he is, despite he's the fallen angel. Like he was saying, without God, he can, devour everybody.
No, because he's already destroyed by the resurrection of Christ. Hell is already destroyed, and Christ is already the victorious
He was trying to say
one.
he can devour us, like us humans, if we're not with God.
No, he can't. Only if we allow that, because he gave us free will.
Yeah. I don't know, he's trying to say, like, if we're not with God, then the Holy Spirit is a little bit away from us, and then
True.
the evil one comes.
True, but it's you make the decision.
Yeah.
I make this decision every day, because we're not like some sort of a tool of God where we don't have a say. So we do have a say. Freedom has this, it's a double-sided coin where you can go with God, but you can go against Him. Yeah. So, it is. The devil can't do nothing. We just have to take ownership of this victory that's already there, of the Christ victory over death
But
and
I
hell.
noted from my experience, if I'm more with God, like you pray and go to church and thing, you're more stronger than if you stop not going to primary church, then you fall into sin more easier than when you're with God.
But you see, you should be looking at going to church, practicing all the discipline like fasting, confession, going to church, and all this discipline that the church requires us to do. You should understand that as being a soldier preparing for the battle. It's not when you go to church that bad things won't happen to you. Yes, they will happen to you, but all this discipline empowers you so you know what to do when this hits you in the face. Whatever this life throws into your face, if you have disciplined yourself in accordance with what the church asks you to do, like fasting, confession, communion, prayer, and all of that, you will know what to do. You will have all this weapon, all this arsenal of weapon on your, how do you say that? That was the word, I'm looking for the word. Arsenal weapon is on your disposal.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to use it. If you don't practice, if you're not a practicing Christian, if you don't do all of this what the church requires you, because you're not going to church because God needs you to, God needs to be glorified, and then God is going to be more glorious because you say amen and you say glory be to the Father and to the Son. God is not going to be any more glorious because you say that. God doesn't need nothing from you, but you need that. If you say glory to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, you are ordering your soul properly. And so you're empowering yourself actually. You're aligning with God more and more. The more you practice this, the more you discipline yourself, the more you're ordering your soul properly, as God wants it to be ordered. And then when trouble comes, and they will come, whether you go to church or you don't go to church, troubles will come. In this world, you'll have trouble. Jesus says that plainly. But when trouble comes, you'll have all this weapon on this world, and you'll know what to use. Whether to use firearms.
Even what you said before, we all are unique in our way. Like, I've listened to so many Orthodox monks, and each monk always tells his story more different to the other, and sometimes it's confusing. Think he just said this place said he's more progressive, this is more strict guy, and it confuses, and you think, who should you listen to?
Well, you need to choose, but then stick to the one, because it's more confusing. That's why I'm always saying that you can't go to different parishes because there's different priests, and I mean, we could go for a visit and so on, but you choose one community. There is no perfect community, there is no perfect parish, there's no perfect priest, there's no perfect no way. But then I think that's why this is so important, where we are actually being formed together, and no one is perfect, I'm not perfect, no one is here perfect, but we're doing something together, and then it would be much easier to say, oh, you know what? Tomorrow I'm going to go to the Roman Catholic Church to serve, and then I'm going to go to Anglican Church, and I'm going to go to Baptist Church, and then I'm going to go to, it's just, you can do that, but where will take you? So you pick and choose. It's like making vows. It's like a marriage, I guess. Where you say, okay, it's the integrity of a person saying, yes, I can go and have other women or other men or whatever, but I don't want to. I choose not to. I choose to stay here, or whatever. I choose to do so, knowing that there is no perfect husband, no perfect wife, nothing. But this is what I choose to, because whatever reason you do have, there can be various reasons, and for various people, various reasons. But we do the God's work, I guess, together. And I think this is so important, because we meet and talk and chat and form ourselves. As Saint you did, Saint John of the letter. He says we're all pebbles in a river, and the Holy Spirit is that river, and we crush upon each other, and we beat each other until we are being formed in a perfect roll, or honed. Is that the honed stone? So we need to crush onto each other, I guess, and shape us. We're being shaped. We're being shaped. All right. Any comments, questions?
That was really good, Ada.
It was
That was a
Anyone recorded that?
Yeah.
Nice.
Good on you.
You can write up the transcript for me.
Oh, you recorded the whole session?
Yeah.
Can we put that on YouTube or something, or something like?
Yeah, you
make
can.
a channel
Yeah,
on
yeah.
YouTube, or make a channel.
YouTube's gonna start blowing up.
You done a screen recording, yeah?
Not for this one. A few I've screen recorded just because I didn't bring stuff to do. I just voice
Because
recorded.
if you do,
voice record,
if you
that's
do
fine,
screen record, you can
But
upload
then
it
you
to
can put
YouTube.
it on
Yeah,
you know,
YouTube.
or whatever.
So you make
it's
one.
not just YouTube. It's just there is like Spotify or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you make a YouTube
Got
channel.
the audio file.
I already have. I mean,
Oh.
the church. I made it for the church, but I put nothing there. It was just an idea a few years ago. And I.
So what's the council called here? What's our council called?
The boys.
Council of the evil ones.
Council of the Damned.
And that's how the Psalms start. Where are the Psalms?
That's ESV with Apocrypha, which means it's the Bible with the most books that you can buy, because it includes.
Is that the Catholic one there?
No, it's
Orthodox
the
one.
No,
Orthodox.
it's got 4 Maccabees in it.
Oh, does
and,
it?
4
Well, we have 4 Maccabees.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, but it's very hard to find,
it's got,
fella, unless you get the
Oh,
Orthodox
the Council
one.
of the Wicked.
This is anyway, it's
Because
got more books
the
than
Psalm starts
Orthodox
with,
study.
"Blessed is the
Yeah,
man
okay.
who walks not
Yeah,
in the
okay.
counsel of the wicked."
Oh,
with the
okay.
counsel of the
Are we
wicked.
the council of the wicked? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it's the
So there's no
ESV
blessed men
with
here.
Apocrypha,
That's all right.
Yeah,
which
okay.
That's the beginning of wisdom. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. What scoffers are.
Scoffing.
All right. Yeah, so that's the beginning. All right, guys.
Look, is that alright?
Okay.
The paper quality is not great, if I'm being honest, but probably it would be twice as thick if it was better.
All right, guys.
It's thicker than the Orthodox one.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Fascinating
See you
colour.
next week.
Yeah.
Very nice.
See ya.
There's
Bye.
videos.
Cheers.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Oh, if anyone is available to help us on Saturday, we're doing